What if I told you that the only thing standing between you and everything you've ever wanted is a locked door that was never actually locked? That sounds impossible, right? Yet right now, in this very moment, you might be sitting in a prison of your own making, rattling the bars of limitations that don't even exist, waiting for permission to be free when the key has been in your hand all along. Think about it for a second. How many times have you wanted something so desperately? A relationship, financial freedom, a dream career, perfect health, and felt like there was this invisible wall keeping you from it? You've tried everything. Positive affirmations, vision boards, working harder, praying, manifesting, yet somehow that wall remains. Has this ever happened to you? You do all the right things, but the results just don't come, and you're left wondering what you're doing wrong, or worse, if you're simply not meant to have what you desire. But before we dive deeper into this life-changing revelation, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the globe. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos, because what we're about to explore will fundamentally change how you see reality itself. Now, here's where everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down. There's an ancient teaching, a mental trick so powerful yet so simple, that once you understand it, manifestation stops being this mysterious hit-or-miss process and becomes as reliable as flipping a light switch. We're talking about attracting exactly what you want in as little as 24 hours. Not weeks, not months, not someday when the universe decides you're ready, but days, sometimes even hours. The secret lies in understanding something that most people get completely backwards. You see, we've been conditioned our entire lives to believe that we need to change our external circumstances first before we can feel fulfilled. We think, when I get the money, then I'll feel abundant. When I find love, then I'll feel worthy. When I achieve success, then I'll feel confident. But this is the exact opposite of how reality actually works, and it's the reason why most people spend their entire lives chasing dreams that always seem just out of reach. Stay with me here, because this next part is crucial. What if everything you see around you, your bank account, your relationships, your health, your opportunities, isn't actually the cause of how you feel, but the effect? What if your external world is nothing more than a mirror, reflecting back whatever you're holding in your consciousness? This means that right now, the life you're living is simply showing you what you've been assuming to be true about yourself and your reality. The imprisoned man in our opening story discovered something profound. He wasn't locked in by iron bars or physical walls. He was locked in by his own assumption that he was trapped. The moment he shifted his thinking from "I am a prisoner" to "I am free," the door opened. Not because the door changed, but because he changed. And when he changed internally, his external reality had no choice but to match that shift. What you're about to discover might surprise you, but more importantly, it might finally set you free from the invisible prison you've been living in. Because consciousness isn't just some abstract spiritual concept, it's the actual substance from which your entire experience is created. Your consciousness doesn't change the world. Your consciousness is the world you're experiencing. This is where most people get tripped up, and it's probably where you've been stuck too. We've been taught that manifestation is this complicated process with steps to follow, techniques to master, and a whole lot of waiting involved. We're told to visualize for 20 minutes a day, create vision boards, write affirmations, repeat mantras, and then wait patiently for the universe to deliver. And while you're doing all of this, you're still feeling the absence of what you want, still identifying with lack, still waiting for something external to change so you can finally feel different inside. But here's the hidden truth that changes everything. Manifestation isn't a process at all. It's a state. It's not about becoming something. You're not. It's about recognizing what you already are. When you assume the feeling of your wish already fulfilled, you're not trying to attract it from somewhere out there in the future. You're resting in the reality of already having it right now in this present moment. And that rest, that inner knowing, that's where the actual creation happens, not in the doing, but in the being. Think about how radically different this is from everything you've been taught. Instead of reaching for your desire, trying to pull it toward you through effort and technique, you simply occupy the state of already having it. You don't work to become successful. You assume you already are successful and rest in that assumption. You don't strive to become loved. You feel yourself already loved and live from that feeling. This shift in mindset is the transformation that separates those who manifest consistently from those who struggle endlessly. Let me give you a real example that proves this isn't just theory. There was a soldier back in 1943, stationed at a large army camp in Louisiana. He had recently been drafted and was desperately eager to get out, but only through honorable means. The only way to do this was to apply for a discharge, which required his commanding officer's approval. Based on Army regulations, the commanding officer's decision was final. No appeals, no higher authority to turn to. He followed all the proper procedures, submitted his application, and within 4 hours it came back stamped, disapproved. Now, most people would have accepted defeat at this point. The outer world had spoken its final word. No. There was no logical pathway forward, no strategy to employ, no strings to pull. But this soldier understood something that most people never learn. He understood that the outer circumstances, no matter how final they appeared, were just reflections of his inner state. So instead of accepting the rejection, he made a decision that would change everything. He turned within to his own consciousness and determined to rely entirely on the power of assumption. If this teaching resonated with you, and you want to continue diving deeper into the power of consciousness and manifestation, go ahead and subscribe. There's so much more to explore together, and I want to make sure you're here for what's coming next. Every single night, in that drowsy state between waking and sleeping, he didn't visualize the process of getting the discharge. He didn't imagine filling out forms or convincing officers or going through appeals. Instead, he imagined something much simpler and more powerful. He assumed he already had the discharge. He felt the relief flooding through his body. He felt himself already free, already a civilian, already released from service. He constructed a simple scene in his imagination where he saw himself at home, and he felt the joy and satisfaction of knowing it was done. Not that it would be done someday, but that it was already done in that moment. Days passed, weeks passed. The outer world showed absolutely no signs of change. If he had judged by appearances, if he had let what his eyes could see dictate his inner state, he would have abandoned his assumption and accepted his fate. But he didn't. He remained faithful to the invisible reality he had claimed in consciousness. And then, through a series of events that no logical mind could have predicted or orchestrated, his discharge appeared. It came through channels he could never have planned, in ways he never imagined, but it came. Now I want to go even deeper into this revelation, because what happened to that soldier reveals the mechanics of how reality actually operates. The discharge didn't manifest because the outer world suddenly decided to cooperate. It manifested because he changed inwardly first, and the outer world had no choice but to follow. This is the journey every single person must take if they want to stop being a victim of circumstances and start being the creator of their experience. The impact of understanding this single principle cannot be overstated. It's the difference between spending your life hoping things will change and actually commanding them to change through the power of your own consciousness. Write in the comments, I choose to assume it's already done. if this is starting to click for you, because what comes next will show you exactly how to apply this mental trick to anything you desire. Here's what most people miss when they try to manifest something. They spend all their energy visualizing the journey, imagining every step they need to take to get there. If they want a new job, they visualize sending out resumes, going to interviews, impressing the boss, getting the call. If they want a relationship, they imagine meeting someone, going on dates, building connection. If they want money, they picture working harder, making sales, depositing checks. And the entire time they're doing this, they're reinforcing one fundamental assumption: I don't have it yet. I'm still on the way. I'm still becoming. This is the critical error that keeps people trapped in a perpetual state of reaching without ever grasping. The hidden truth is that the power doesn't lie in visualizing the process. It lies in assuming the end. You don't imagine getting the job, you imagine already having it. You don't picture finding love, you feel yourself already loved. You don't visualize making money, you assume you're already abundant. Can you feel the difference? One keeps you in a state of pursuit, the other places you in a state of possession. When you imagine already having what you desire, something profound happens in your consciousness. You're no longer reaching for it, which means you're no longer confirming its absence. Instead, you're resting in it. You feel the relief that comes with completion. You experience the satisfaction of fulfillment. You embody the finality of achievement. And this rest, this feeling of already being there, this is where the actual transformation occurs. Not in the striving, but in the settling. Not in the chasing, but in the claiming. Think about how you feel when you actually have something. When you own a house, you don't spend your days imagining owning it. You simply live in it. When you're in a loving relationship, you don't constantly visualize being loved. You rest in the experience of love. When you have money in the bank, you don't anxiously picture having money. You move through life with the quiet confidence of financial security. That feeling, that state of having, is what you need to occupy now before the physical evidence appears. This is the decision that separates those who manifest effortlessly from those who struggle endlessly. Now let me reveal something that will completely shift how you see your reality. Your external world isn't creating itself independently of you. It's not random. It's not punishing you or testing you or withholding from you. Your external reality is a mirror, and it's reflecting back to you exactly what you're assuming to be true in your consciousness. When you assume you are free, the world must produce evidence of freedom. When you assume you are successful, circumstances arrange themselves to confirm success. When you assume you are loved, people and situations appear that reflect love back to you. This isn't wishful thinking or New Age philosophy. This is law, as precise and reliable as any. Mathematical equation. The mirror doesn't create the image. It can only reflect what's placed before it. If you stand in front of a mirror frowning, the mirror shows you a frown. You wouldn't stand there demanding the mirror show you a smile while you continue frowning, would you? Yet this is exactly what most people do with their lives. They hold assumptions of lack, limitation, and impossibility in their consciousness, then wonder why their external circumstances keep reflecting those same patterns back to them. The revelation here is both liberating and sobering. Liberating because it means you have complete power over your experience. Change what you're assuming internally, and the external must follow. Sobering because it means you can no longer blame external circumstances, other people, or bad luck for what you're experiencing. The mirror is simply doing its job, showing you what you've been showing it. This is why the soldier's discharge manifested, not because he convinced the army to change its mind, not because he found a loophole in the system, not because he got lucky. It manifested because he changed his inner assumption from "I am trapped in the army" to I am already free and discharged, and the mirror of reality had no choice but to reflect that new assumption back to him. The outer world didn't create his freedom. It reflected his inner state of freedom. Behind the scenes of every manifestation you've ever experienced, whether you realized it or not, this same principle was operating. Every time something worked out for you, it's because you were occupying the state of it already being done, even if just for a moment. Every time you struggled and failed to manifest something, it's because you remained in the state of wanting, reaching, lacking. The journey from where you are to where you want to be isn't measured in time or steps. It's measured in the shift from one state of consciousness to another. Drop a comment saying, "I am the mirror's master," if you're ready to take full responsibility for what your reality is reflecting back to you. Because understanding this principle intellectually is one thing, but applying it consistently is where the real magic happens. So you might be wondering, if this is law, if the mirror always reflects what I'm assuming, why doesn't my desire show up instantly? Why is there sometimes a gap between the moment I decide to assume something new and the moment I actually see it in my physical reality? This is the question that trips up almost everyone, and the answer is going to shift everything for you. The time between your assumption and its physical manifestation isn't the law working slowly. It's not the universe testing you or making you prove you're worthy. That lag, that gap, that waiting period is actually your own doubt resurrecting itself moment after moment after moment. Every time you check your bank account and feel disappointed, you're resurrecting lack. Every time you look for evidence that it's working and don't see it, you're resurrecting absence. Every time you question whether this is real, you're bringing the old assumption back to life. Here's the revelation that changes the game. The instant you assume something in consciousness, it's already done. Not will be done, not working its way toward being done. Already done, complete, finished. The outer manifestation is simply the shadow catching up to the substance. You are the substance. Your consciousness, your assumption, that's the real thing. The physical evidence is just the shadow that follows. But if you keep turning around to check if the shadow is there, if you keep doubting, if you keep wavering between the new assumption and the old one, you're essentially flickering the light on and off. The shadow can't catch up if you won't stay still. This is where persistence becomes everything. Not the kind of persistence where you're grinding and forcing and pushing. The kind of persistence where you simply refuse to return to the old assumption, where you catch yourself doubting and gently redirect back to the feeling of the wish fulfilled, where you make the decision over and over to occupy the state of having what you desire, regardless of what your eyes see or what your circumstances suggest. Let me show you exactly how this works, with a real transformation that proves the impact of this principle. There was a man working as a financial analyst at a bank. He was competent, educated, experienced, but he felt absolutely trapped. The job paid him just enough to maintain his life, but offered no real prospects for advancement. He had gone to his superiors asking for raises, inquiring about promotions, and they told him frankly that any major improvement was impossible. They even suggested that if he was dissatisfied, he could look for another job elsewhere. That response only deepened his sense of being stuck. If something shifted inside you while watching this, if you felt that recognition of truth, hit that like button. It lets me know this message landed with you in a meaningful way. But what he really wanted, what he dreamed about, was managing investment funds for a large institution, a foundation or a major university. That was his ideal. Yet it seemed completely impossible. He had no connections in that world, no pathway to get there, no reason to believe such an opportunity would ever present itself. The external circumstances were screaming at him, "This isn't possible for you. Stay where you are. Accept your limitations." Then he learned this mental trick. He was taught that his current situation was only a reflection of his conception of himself, and that by changing his inner assumption, he could transform his outer circumstances. So here's what he did. Every single night before falling asleep, he assumed he already had that dream position. He didn't visualize applying for jobs. He didn't imagine networking or interviewing. Instead, he imagined something much more powerful. He felt himself retiring at the end of one of the most successful days of his life in that role. He felt the satisfaction of closing important deals, managing significant funds, working for exactly the kind of organization he had always dreamed of. Night after night, without exception, he maintained this practice. He occupied the state of already being successful, already hired, already fulfilling that role. He wasn't hoping it would happen someday. He was resting in the experience of it being done now. And here's what's crucial. He didn't see any evidence for weeks. His job situation didn't change. No calls came, no opportunities appeared, but he didn't waver. He understood that the outer world is always playing catch-up to consciousness, and as long as he persisted in his new assumption, the mirror would eventually have to reflect it. This was early December when he started. By early February, something extraordinary happened. A director from one of the wealthiest foundations in the entire world contacted him directly and asked if he would be interested in joining the foundation in an executive capacity, managing their investments. After brief discussions, he accepted. Today, he's earning substantially more, has clear prospects for advancement, and is doing exactly what he had imagined himself doing in those nightly sessions. He didn't manipulate anyone. He didn't network his way in. He didn't force anything. He simply assumed the end, persisted in that assumption, and allowed the universe to conform. The transformation didn't happen because he got lucky. It happened because he made a decision in consciousness first, maintained that decision without wavering, and the physical reality had no choice but to follow. This is the hidden mechanism behind every major breakthrough, every unexpected opportunity, every miracle you've ever witnessed. Someone shifted their inner state first, and the outer world reflected that shift. Type "I persist" in the new in the comments if you're beginning to see how different this is from everything you've tried before, because the next layer of this teaching reveals exactly how to make your assumptions feel so natural that manifestation becomes effortless. Now, I want to reveal something that most people completely misunderstand about imagination. When you close your eyes and imagine yourself living in your desired reality, you think you're rehearsing for something that's going to happen later. You think you're practicing for a future event, preparing yourself mentally for when it finally arrives. But that's not what's actually happening. The moment you imagine your desire fulfilled, the moment you assume the feeling of already having it, you're not preparing, you're creating. Right there, in that instant, you've planted a seed in consciousness. Think about what happens when you plant an actual seed in the ground. The seed doesn't look like the tree. It doesn't resemble the fruit. From the outside, it appears like nothing significant has happened. The soil looks the same. But beneath the surface, in the invisible realm, something profound has been set in motion. The seed contains the entire blueprint of the tree. Everything needed for full manifestation is encoded within it. Your assumption works exactly the same way. The moment you feel yourself already having what you desire, you've planted the complete blueprint of that reality in consciousness. Here's where most people sabotage their own manifestations without even realizing it. They plant the seed one day, feel excited about it, occupy that state of fulfillment for maybe an hour or a day. Then they wake up the next morning, check their circumstances, see that nothing has changed yet, and immediately return to the feeling of lack. They start thinking, well, it's not here yet. Maybe it won't work for me. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. And in that moment, they've dug up the seed. They've aborted the manifestation before it had a chance to grow. Your persistence is what waters the seed. Your faith is what guards it from the birds of doubt that want to devour it before it can sprout. And time, that interval between assumption and manifestation, is simply the gestation period, the natural harvesting process. But if you keep digging up the seed to check if it's growing, if you keep switching back and forth between the feeling of having and the feeling of lacking, you're essentially planting and uprooting, planting and uprooting. Nothing can grow under those conditions. The transformation happens when you learn to sustain the feeling, not for an hour, not for a day, but until it becomes natural to you, until occupying the state of the wish fulfilled feels more real than your current circumstances. This is the journey that separates successful manifestation from perpetual hoping. You've got to live in that assumption consistently enough that it becomes your new default state. But here's the hidden truth that makes this even more important. Whether you realize it or not, whether you're doing this consciously or unconsciously, you are always assuming something. Right now, in this very moment, you're operating from a set of assumptions about yourself, about your capabilities, about what's possible for you, about what you deserve. The law of assumption is working all the time. It never stops. It's as constant as gravity. So the real question isn't, does this work? The question is, am I assuming consciously or unconsciously? Because if you're not deliberately choosing your assumptions, you're still assuming. You're just doing it by default. You're letting your past experiences, your conditioning, your fears, and your current circumstances dictate what you assume about your reality. And most people, unfortunately, are unconsciously assuming limitation and lack every single day. They wake up and unconsciously assume, this is just how my life is. Things don't work out for me. I'm not lucky. Money is hard to come by. Good relationships aren't for people like me. Success is for other people. These aren't thoughts they're actively choosing. They're underlying assumptions that have become so habitual they don't even notice them anymore. But the law doesn't care whether your assumptions are conscious or unconscious. It responds to what you're assuming either way. This is why understanding this principle has such a massive impact. Once you become aware that you're always assuming something, you can start making conscious decisions about what you want to assume. Instead of letting your circumstances dictate your assumptions, you can let your assumptions dictate your circumstances. Instead of looking at your bank account and assuming lack, you can assume abundance regardless of what the numbers say. Instead of looking at your relationship status and assuming loneliness, you can assume love regardless of who's physically in your life. Right now, behind the scenes of your entire life experience, there's been this invisible mechanism operating. Every moment you felt stuck was a moment of unconscious negative assumption. Every breakthrough you've experienced was a moment when, whether you realized it or not, you occupied a positive assumption strongly enough that reality had to reflect it. The revelation isn't that you need to learn some new skill, it's that you need to become conscious of a skill you've been using your entire life and start directing it deliberately. Leave a comment with, I assume consciously now, if you're ready to take control of what you're planting in the garden of your consciousness, because what I'm about to share next will give you the exact technique to make this effortless. The reason you're stuck right now isn't because your circumstances are holding you back. It's because you're imprisoned by what I call the prison of appearances. You look around at your life and you see evidence everywhere. You see your bank balance, your job title, your relationship status, your health, your opportunities, or lack thereof. And your mind immediately says, this is reality, this is fact, this is what's true. But that's the trap. What your senses are telling you is fact is actually just an echo. It's the shadow of assumptions you held yesterday, last week, last month, last year. The real fact, the actual substance, is consciousness itself. Everything you're seeing right now in your physical reality is simply your past assumptions made visible. It's like looking at a photograph of yourself from last year. That photograph isn't you right now. It's a record of who you were then. Your current circumstances work the same way. They're showing you who you were being in consciousness at some point in the past, but most people make the critical mistake of taking that photograph and saying, "This is who I am. This is my reality. This is what I have to work with." And then they do something even more counterproductive. They try to change the photograph itself. They try to rearrange their circumstances without changing the consciousness that created those circumstances in the first place. Imagine standing in front of a mirror with a frown on your face, and instead of changing your expression, you reach out and try to rearrange the reflection in the mirror to make it smile. That's absurd, right? Yet this is exactly what people do with their lives every single day. They look at their financial situation and try to fix it by working more hours, cutting expenses, hustling harder, all while maintaining the same internal assumption of lack. They look at their relationships and try to fix them by changing partners, moving to new cities, joining dating apps, all while carrying the same assumption of unworthiness or unavailability. They look at their careers and try to fix them by switching jobs, getting more certifications, networking more, all while holding the same self-concept of being stuck or limited. Here's the revelation that changes everything. If you want a different reflection, you have to change what's being reflected. You have to change the face you're showing the mirror. You have to change the assumption you're holding in consciousness. And this brings us to the most important transformation you can possibly make: changing your fundamental conception of yourself. Your self-concept is the image you hold of who you are. It's the collection of beliefs, assumptions, and feelings you have about yourself that operate mostly beneath your conscious awareness. And here's the hidden truth: your self-concept follows you everywhere. You can change your job, but if your self-concept is, "I'm someone who struggles financially," you'll create struggle in the new job. You can change your relationship, but if your self-concept is, "I'm not really lovable," you'll recreate dynamics that confirm that belief in the new relationship. You can move to a new city, but if your self-concept is, "I'm someone life happens to," rather than someone who creates their life, you'll find yourself in similar circumstances in the new location. This is why you see the same patterns repeating in people's lives. They keep attracting the same type of partner. They keep running into the same financial obstacles. They keep hitting the same career ceiling, and they think it's bad luck, or that the world is against them, or that they're just not meant to have what they want. But the real issue is that they're carrying the same self-concept into every new situation, and that self-concept is creating the same results over and over again. The impact of this understanding cannot be overstated. Once you realize that your external circumstances are always going to match your internal self-concept, you stop wasting energy trying to change the outside, and you focus all your power on changing the inside. You stop asking, "How can I get a better job?" and start asking, "Who do I need to be in consciousness to already have that better job?" You stop asking, "How can I attract the right relationship?" and start asking, "What would I assume about myself if I were already in that relationship?" This is the journey from being a prisoner of appearances to being a master of consciousness. Behind the scenes of every major life transformation, there's always a shift in self-concept that preceded it. The person who went from broke to abundant didn't just get lucky. They shifted their self-concept from someone who struggles with money to someone who naturally attracts abundance. The person who went from lonely to loved didn't just meet the right person. They shifted their self-concept from unworthy of love to deeply lovable and cherished. Your self-concept is the seed from which your entire life grows. If the seed is limitation, the tree will be limitation no matter where you plant it. But if you change the seed to one of possibility, capability and worthiness, then every circumstance, every opportunity, every relationship will reflect that new foundation. Put "I am changing the seed" in the comments if you're finally seeing why changing yourself internally is the only real path to lasting external change, because the technique I'm about to share will show you exactly how to reconstruct your self-concept in a way that makes your desires inevitable. Now, I want to show you the pattern that's hidden in plain sight. One that's been taught for thousands of years, but misunderstood by almost everyone. You've probably heard the story of resurrection. It's one of the most famous stories ever told. But what if I told you it's not history? It's not about something that happened to someone else 2,000 years ago. It's psychology. It's the blueprint for every transformation you'll ever make in your life, and it's happening to you right now. The crucifixion isn't about physical death. It's about the death of your old self-concept. It's that moment when you make the decision to let go of who you've been, the version of yourself that's been struggling, lacking, limited, stuck. You crucify that old identity. You kill it off. You say, "I am no longer that person. I am no longer someone who struggles with money. I am no longer someone who can't find love. I am no longer someone stuck in circumstances I can't control." That's the crucifixion, and it's absolutely necessary. But here's where most people fail. After they crucify the old self, after they make that decision to let it die, they enter what I call the burial period. This is the waiting time when nothing seems to be changing externally. Your bank account still shows the same numbers. Your relationship status hasn't shifted. Your job situation looks identical. And during this burial period, this in-between space, doubt starts creeping in. Your mind starts saying, "See, nothing's different. Maybe this doesn't work. Maybe I should go back to my old way of thinking." And that's exactly what most people do. They dig up the corpse. They resurrect the old self-concept before the new one has had a chance to be born. They return to their old assumptions, their old patterns, their old identity. They abort the entire transformation process right at the most critical moment. It's like planting a seed, then digging it up 3 days later because you don't see a tree yet. The resurrection, the actual manifestation of your new reality, only happens if you stay buried with the old self long enough for the new self to emerge. You have to persist in your new assumption through the burial period. You have to maintain your new self-concept even when the external world is showing you no evidence. You have to trust that beneath the surface, in the invisible realm of consciousness, the transformation is already complete. And then, after the gestation period, comes the resurrection. Your new assumption breaks through into physical reality, and you experience the manifestation of what you've been assuming all along. This is the hidden journey that every successful manifestation takes. Death of the old, burial in the invisible, resurrection into the visible. But you cannot skip the burial period. You cannot demand to see proof before you're willing to let the old self stay dead. The transformation requires faith during the in-between. Let me give you another powerful illustration of how this works. There's an ancient story about a widow who had almost nothing left, just a handful of meal and a tiny bit of oil. She was at the end of her resources, facing starvation. A prophet came to her and told her to do something that seemed absolutely insane. Pour out the oil. She looked at him and said, "But I have nothing. There's barely anything here." And he said, "Pour anyway." Here's the revelation in this story. She didn't wait to see more oil appear before she started pouring. She didn't say, "Show me the abundance first, then I'll act." Abundantly. She poured with what little she had, acting from the assumption of abundance rather than lack. And as she poured, the oil didn't run out. It multiplied, it overflowed, it filled every vessel in her house until she had more than she could contain. This is the exact opposite of how most people operate. They wait for the evidence before they'll change their behavior or their feeling. They say, "When I see the money in my account, then I'll feel abundant. When someone loves me, then I'll feel lovable. When I get the success, then I'll feel confident." But that's backwards. That's waiting for the supply to justify the feeling. The teaching here is radical, and it changes everything. You must feel supplied before the supply appears. You must pour before you see the overflow. You must assume the wish is fulfilled before the evidence shows up. The feeling doesn't follow the manifestation. The feeling precedes it. The feeling is what creates it. When the widow poured, she was making a decision in consciousness. She was acting from the end. She was occupying the state of someone who had abundance to give, not someone who was empty and desperate. And because consciousness is the only reality, because the external world is just a mirror reflecting what we assume, the oil had no choice but to multiply and match her assumption. This is the mental trick that attracts exactly what you want in 24 hours. Not sitting around waiting and hoping, not begging the universe to change your circumstances, but making the internal shift first, occupying the state of already having what you desire, and then watching as the external reality rearranges itself to match. Drop "I pour" first in the comments if you're understanding that you don't wait for life to give you permission to feel fulfilled. You assume fulfillment first, and life has no choice but to conform. So let's talk about what faith actually means, because this word has been so misunderstood that it's become almost useless. Most people think faith is blind belief. They think it's hoping really hard that something might happen someday. They think it's wishful thinking with a spiritual bow on top. But that's not faith. That's not what creates reality. Real faith is something completely different, and understanding this difference is the transformation that separates those who manifest consistently from those who keep hoping and waiting. True faith is substance. Not air, not fantasy, substance. It's the actual material of reality. When ancient texts say faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, they're not being poetic. They're describing a mechanism. Your faith, your assumption, your conviction is the substance. It's the real thing. The physical manifestation that comes later is just the shadow of that substance, the evidence of that invisible reality. This means you're not waiting for something to exist. You're claiming it exists right now in the realm that matters most, consciousness. You're calling things that don't exist in the physical as though they already exist in the invisible. And because the invisible always precedes the visible, because consciousness always comes before matter, what you claim in faith must eventually appear in form. But here's the reversal that trips everyone up. People want to see it first, then they'll believe it. They want the evidence before they'll have faith. They want proof before they'll assume. And that's exactly backwards. That's like waiting for the fruit to appear before you're willing to plant the seed. That's demanding to see the building before you're willing to lay the foundation. It doesn't work that way. You have to believe it first. You have to assume it first. You have to claim it in the invisible realm before it can show up in the visible realm. This is where the widow's story becomes even more powerful. Her assumption was the vessel. Think about that. She didn't have a physical vessel full of oil. She had an assumption, a decision in consciousness, a mental stance that said, "I have abundance to pour." That assumption was her vessel, and her persistence, her willingness to keep pouring even when it seemed crazy, even when it contradicted all physical evidence. That was the pouring itself. Every time you return to your assumption, every time you redirect your thoughts back to the feeling of the wish fulfilled, every time you choose to occupy that state despite your circumstances, you are pouring. You're pouring your consciousness, your attention, your creative power into the vessel of your assumption. And just like the widow's oil, it multiplies, it overflows, it fills every area of your life until you have more than you can contain. But you have to pour even when your senses are screaming at you that there's nothing there. You have to assume even when your bank account, your relationship status, your health, your circumstances are all telling you a different story. You have to act as though there is everything when it looks like there's nothing, because acting as though creates the thing you're acting as though you have. Your behavior, your feeling, your assumption in consciousness is what calls it into being. This is the hidden truth that changes everything. You're not trying to convince yourself that something false is true. You're recognizing that there are two realms of reality, the invisible and the visible, and the invisible is always the cause, while the visible is always the effect. When you assume something in consciousness, it's already true in the causal realm. It's already done. The visible realm is just playing catch-up, reflecting that inner reality back to you. Most people spend their entire lives looking at the visible realm and using it to decide what they should assume. They look at their circumstances and let those circumstances dictate their faith, their assumptions, their mental states. But masters of manifestation do the opposite. They decide what they want to assume, they hold that assumption regardless of visible circumstances, and they watch as the visible realm has no choice but to conform. This is the journey from being a victim to being a creator. Behind the scenes of your life, there's always been this mechanism operating. When you felt powerless, it's because you were letting the visible dictate the invisible. When you've experienced breakthroughs, it's because you reversed that. Relationship, you let the invisible dictate the visible. You assumed first, persisted in that assumption, and reality followed. The impact of understanding this principle cannot be exaggerated. It means you're never at the mercy of circumstances again. It means you never have to wait for external permission to feel fulfilled. It means you can start creating your reality right now, in this moment, simply by making a decision about what you're going to assume, regardless of what you see. Your assumption is always the vessel. What you persistently assume, what you return to moment after moment, day after day, that's what's being poured. And the manifestation, the overflow, the physical evidence is always the result, never the cause, always the result. Comment, I am the cause, if you're seeing that you don't wait for reality to change before you change your assumption. You change your assumption and reality has to follow, because that's the only order that works. Now, I want to take you to the deepest revelation of all, the one that changes not just how you manifest, but how you see yourself and reality itself. There comes a moment in this journey when something shifts so fundamentally that you can never go back to your old way of thinking. It's the moment when you realize that you are not in the world is in you. Most people walk through life believing they're a small person in a big world, subject to forces beyond their control, at the mercy of circumstances. Luck, other people's decisions, economic conditions, health challenges. They feel like they're inside this massive reality that was here before them and will be here after them, and the best they can do is try to navigate it successfully. But that entire perspective is backwards. It's the ultimate illusion that keeps you imprisoned. The truth is, you're not a character in a story someone else is writing. You're the dreamer, and everything you experience, every person, every circumstance, every challenge, every opportunity, is your own consciousness made visible. You're not experiencing an objective world that exists independently of you. You're experiencing the projection of your own assumptions, beliefs, and concepts about yourself. The world you see is the world you are. It's not happening to you. It's happening from you. This is the awakening that brings complete freedom. Because if you're the author of your experience, if you're the dreamer of your dream, then nothing is fixed. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is happening to you that you didn't first agree to in consciousness. Every limitation you're experiencing, you placed there. Every struggle you're facing, you're creating through your assumptions. And that means you have the power to uncreate it, to assume differently, to dream a new dream. But this freedom comes with responsibility. You can no longer blame external circumstances. You can no longer say, life did this to me, or other people are holding me back, or I'm just unlucky. You have to own the fact that everything in your experience is a reflection of something in your consciousness. That can feel heavy at first, but it's actually the most liberating truth you'll ever encounter. Because if you created this reality unconsciously through unexamined assumptions, imagine what you can create consciously through deliberate ones. Behind the scenes of this entire teaching is a single truth that's been pointed to for thousands of years, but understood by very few. When Moses asked for the name of the divine, the answer was I am, not a name like you'd put on a business card, not I am this or I am that, just I am. First person, present tense, pure existence, pure awareness before it takes any particular form. This is the name of the creative power, and it's your name too. When you say I am, you're invoking the same power that creates worlds. You're speaking from that eternal foundation of pure consciousness that exists before and beyond all circumstances. And whatever you attach to those two words, I am, becomes your reality. Because those words are not descriptive, they're creative. They're commanding reality to take that form. When you say, I am poor, you're not describing a fact. You're issuing a decree. You're commanding your consciousness to produce the experience of poverty. When you say, I am lonely, you're not observing your situation. You're creating loneliness. When you say, I am stuck, you're building the walls of your own prison. But the reverse is equally true. When you say, I am abundant, you're commanding abundance to appear. When you say, I am loved, you're creating the experience of love. When you say, I am free, you're opening every door. This pure awareness that you are, this I am, before you add anything to it, is the eternal foundation that never changes. It's always here. It's always now. It doesn't belong to your circumstances. Your circumstances belong to it. It doesn't depend on your body, your past, your achievements, or your failures. All of those things depend on it. This awareness is what you truly are, and it's the creative power behind everything you experience. Most people live their entire lives never realizing this. They think they're their body, their story, their circumstances. They identify with the temporary costume they're wearing instead of recognizing the eternal presence wearing it. And because they're identified with limitation, they experience limitation. But the moment you recognize yourself as pure awareness, as I am itself, everything changes. You realize you're not defined by anything external. You can assume any state. You can be anything. You can experience anything. This is the transformation from feeling like a victim of life to knowing yourself as the creator of life. It's the journey from powerlessness to complete creative authority. And it happens the moment you stop looking outside yourself for permission, validation, or change, and start recognizing that the power has always been within you because it is you. Type, I am is all I need. If you're beginning to see that you're not a limited being trying to use manifestation techniques, you are the creative power itself, and everything else is just costumes you're choosing to wear. Now let me show you something that might be difficult to accept at first, but once you truly understand it, it gives you complete power over every relationship and circumstance in your life. Every single person you encounter, every situation you face, every challenge or opportunity that appears, all of it is you pushed out. It's your consciousness externalized and made visible in the form of other people and circumstances. When someone treats you poorly, that's not random. When someone loves you deeply, that's not luck. When opportunities appear, that's not coincidence. When doors close, that's not the universe being cruel. Every single thing and every single person in your experience is reflecting back to you what you've been assuming about yourself and your reality. The person who disrespects you is mirroring your own lack of self-respect. The person who adores you is reflecting your assumption of being worthy of adoration. The boss who overlooks you is showing you your own assumption of being overlooked. The friend who supports you is manifesting your assumption of being supported. This isn't about blame, it's about power. Because if everyone is you pushed out, if every circumstance is a reflection of your consciousness, then you're never at the mercy of external forces. You're not a victim of other people's behavior. You're not subject to random chance. You're the one creating it all through your assumptions, and that means you can change it all by changing your assumptions. The law operating behind all of this is completely impersonal. It doesn't care about your story. It doesn't care about your past. It doesn't care whether you think you deserve something or whether you've earned it. It simply reflects your current assumption back to you with perfect accuracy. If you assume limitation, you get limitation. If you assume abundance, you get abundance. If you assume people are against you, they appear against you. If you assume people support you, they show up supportive. The law doesn't judge. It doesn't decide. It just mirrors. This is the transformation that takes you from feeling powerless to recognizing your complete creative authority. Every interaction, every experience is showing you what you're broadcasting from consciousness, and the moment you change the broadcast, the reception changes. Change your assumption about someone, and their behavior toward you must change. Change your assumption about your circumstances, and new circumstances must appear. But here's where we need to make an important distinction, because this is where most people get confused and end up stuck. When I talk about assumption, I'm not talking about wishing. I'm not talking about hoping. I'm not talking about positive thinking or trying really hard to believe something. An assumption is not a wish. It's a conviction. It's a knowing. It's the certainty that something is true right now, regardless of what your senses are reporting. Most people say they're assuming something when what they're actually doing is hoping for something. They say, I'm assuming I'm wealthy, but in their consciousness, they're really thinking, I hope I become wealthy someday. Or, I wish I was wealthy, but I'm not. That's not an assumption. That's a wish dressed up in manifestation language, and wishing doesn't create. Only assuming creates. You're always assuming something. Right now, in this very moment, you're operating from a set of assumptions about yourself, about your capabilities, about what's possible for you. The question isn't whether you're assuming, you are. The question is whether you're assuming consciously or unconsciously. Are you deliberately choosing your assumptions based on what you desire, or are you unconsciously accepting assumptions based on your past experiences and current circumstances? To assume consciously requires courage. It requires you to dare to claim something that contradicts everything your outer world is showing you. It requires you to stand firm in an invisible reality when the visible reality is screaming the opposite. It means saying, I am abundant when your bank account is empty. It means claiming, I am loved when you're alone. It means asserting, I am successful when you're unemployed. This feels crazy to most people because they've been conditioned to let the visible dictate the invisible. But masters of manifestation do the opposite. They let the invisible dictate the visible. This is the journey from unconscious living to conscious creating. Behind the scenes of every limitation you're experiencing right now is an assumption you've been holding probably for years, that you never examined or questioned. You just accepted it as true because circumstances seemed to confirm it. But circumstances don't create assumptions. Assumptions create circumstances. So when you start assuming consciously, when you start choosing your convictions based on what you want rather than what you see, everything in your external world has to rearrange itself to match. The impact of this single shift cannot be overstated. Once you stop wishing and start assuming, once you stop hoping, things will change and start knowing they already have in consciousness, manifestation stops being hit or miss. It becomes law. It becomes as reliable as cause and effect, because you're finally working with the mechanism correctly instead of fighting against it. Leave "I claim it now" in the comments if you're ready to stop wishing for your desires and start assuming them as already accomplished. Because what comes next is the practical technique that makes this transformation effortless. So here's the secret that separates fast manifestation from slow manifestation, effortless creation from constant struggle. It all comes down to how natural your assumption feels. If an assumption feels completely natural to you, if it requires no effort to maintain, if occupying that state is as easy as breathing, manifestation happens swiftly, sometimes within hours. But if your assumption feels forced, if you have to strain to maintain it, if it feels like you're pretending or lying to yourself, the gap between assumption and manifestation widens. The strain itself creates resistance. Think about something you already assume about yourself that feels completely natural. Maybe you assume you're a good friend, or that you're intelligent, or that you're creative. Notice how effortless it is to hold those assumptions. You don't have to work at believing them. You don't have to convince yourself daily. They just are. They're so natural that you don't even think about them. They're simply part of your identity. And because they're natural, your life constantly produces evidence that confirms them without you having to force anything. Now, contrast that with trying to assume something that contradicts your current experience. Let's say you want to assume you're wealthy when you're currently broke. At first, it feels awkward. It feels fake. It feels like you're lying to yourself. Your mind keeps pulling you back to the reality of your empty bank account. Every time you try to feel wealthy, doubt creeps in. That strain, that awkwardness, that sense of effort, that's what creates the delay in manifestation. But here's the transformation. The work isn't about forcing the outer world to change. The work is about making the inner assumption feel natural. And you do that through repetition, through feeling, through living in the end so consistently that it becomes your habitual state. It's like learning any new skill. The first time you do it, it feels strange and requires conscious effort. But through repetition, it becomes automatic, natural, effortless. When you practice assuming your desire fulfilled every single day, when you feel it repeatedly, when you return to that state again and again, something shifts. What felt forced at first starts to feel normal. What felt like pretending starts to feel like truth. What required effort starts to require no effort at all. And the moment your assumption becomes natural, the moment it feels as easy to assume you're wealthy as it does to assume you're breathing, that's when manifestation speeds up dramatically. This brings us to one of the most important concepts you need to understand: living in the end. Most people, when they try to manifest something, are still operating from a state of not having it. They're trying to bring it about through effort. They're working toward it, reaching for it, attempting to make it happen. They're in the energy of becoming rather than being. And that entire approach is backwards. The unskilled person tries to figure out how to get their desire. They strategize, they plan, they hustle, they effort. They're constantly doing things to make it happen. And all of that activity is actually a confession. I don't have it yet. I'm trying to get it. I'm still in the process of becoming someone who has this. That energy of trying, that mindset of effort keeps them in a perpetual state of separation from their desire. But the master knows something completely different. The master knows it's already finished, not that it will be finished if they do the right things. Already finished, already done, already complete in consciousness, and because they know this, they don't try to bring it about, they don't effort, they simply live from that place of completion. They imagine from the end, not toward the end. This is a subtle shift, but it changes everything. Instead of imagining yourself getting the job, you imagine from the place of already having the job. Instead of visualizing finding love, you live from the state of already being loved. Instead of picturing yourself making money, you operate from the consciousness of already being abundant. You're not becoming it. You already are it in consciousness, and you're simply waiting for the mirror of reality to catch up and reflect that back to you. This shift from wanting to being is the difference between begging and commanding. When you want something, you're acknowledging you don't have it. You're in a state of lack. You're asking reality to please give you what you're missing. That's begging. But when you assume you already are what you desire to be, when you occupy that state fully, you're not asking. You're commanding. You're declaring the truth of your reality in consciousness, and the outer world has no choice but to obey that command. Behind the scenes of every instant manifestation, every miracle, every impossible thing that suddenly became possible, there was someone who stopped trying to get it and started being it. They made the decision to live in the end, to occupy the state of the wish fulfilled, to rest in the completion rather than strain in the pursuit. Comment: I live in the end. If you're understanding that you don't chase your desires, you embody them first, and then reality has no choice but to deliver the evidence of what you've already become. Now, I want to reveal to you the most misunderstood aspect of this entire process, and it's the reason why so many people fail right at the finish line. There's a concept that's been taught symbolically for thousands of years, but rarely grasped in its true meaning. When creation was described as taking 6 days, followed by rest on the 7th, most people think that rest came from exhaustion. They think even the divine needed a break. But that's not what rest means here at all. The rest on the 7th day wasn't about being tired, it was about completion. It was the recognition that creation was finished. There was nothing more to do, not because the work was hard, but because the work was done. And this is exactly the state you need to enter when you've made your assumption. You need to enter what I call the Sabbath, the rest that comes from knowing it's already finished. When you truly assume your desire fulfilled, when you occupy that state in consciousness, you should feel a deep sense of rest. Not the kind of rest that comes from being worn out, but the kind that comes from completion. You're not waiting for it to be done. It is done. In consciousness, where it actually matters, the creation is complete. The outer manifestation is just the inevitable reflection of that inner completion. So there's nothing to do, nothing to force, nothing to chase. You simply rest in the certainty of it being finished. But here's what happens to most people. They make their assumption, they occupy the state for a moment, maybe even for a day, and then immediately they return to effort. They start checking their bank account obsessively. They start strategizing how to make it happen. They start anxiously looking for signs that it's working. They start worrying about whether they're doing it right. And all of that activity is actually a confession. It's not done yet. I don't trust this. I need to make it happen myself. That's leaving the Sabbath. That's returning to labor. That's going back to the 6 days of effort instead of resting in the 7th day of completion. And as long as you're laboring, as long as you're anxiously trying to force the manifestation, you're telling consciousness that it's not finished. You're resurrecting doubt. You're confirming lack. The rest is where the power is. The moment you can assume your desire and then rest in that assumption without anxiously checking for evidence, without desperately trying to make it happen, that's when you've entered the state where manifestation is inevitable. This connects directly to understanding what I mean by feeling, because this word gets misunderstood more than almost anything else in manifestation teaching. When I say you need to feel your desire fulfilled, most people think I'm talking about emotion. They think they need to get excited, pump themselves up, generate enthusiasm. They try to create this emotional high where they're buzzing with excitement about their desire. And when that excitement fades, which it always does, they think they've lost the feeling. But that's not what feeling means. In this context, the feeling I'm talking about isn't emotion, it's not excitement, it's not getting yourself worked up into an enthusiastic state. The feeling is the inner conviction of already being what you want to be. It's a quiet knowing, it's a settled certainty, it's a sense of naturalness that needs no external validation. Think about something you already have in your life that you never question. Maybe it's your name, or your home, or a relationship. Do you feel excited about it every moment? No. But there's a quiet conviction that it's yours. There's a settled knowing that needs no proof. You're not constantly checking to make sure it's still there. You're not emotionally charged about it. You just know it's real. That's the feeling. You can feel wealthy without being excited. You can feel loved without being giddy. You can feel successful without being pumped up. The feeling is simply the sense of having, not the sense of wanting. It's the consciousness of already being it, not the hope of becoming it. It's rest, not reach. It's certainty, not anticipation. When you understand this distinction, it changes everything, because you stop trying to manufacture emotional highs that can't be sustained. You stop thinking you've failed when the excitement wears off. Instead, you cultivate that quiet, settled, natural feeling of already having what you desire. And that feeling can be maintained indefinitely because it doesn't require effort or strain. It's just a gentle knowing, a peaceful assumption, a restful certainty. This is the transformation from emotional manifestation, which is exhausting and inconsistent, to consciousness-based creation, which is effortless and reliable. Behind the scenes of every sustained manifestation, there's this quality of rest, this settled conviction, this natural feeling of already being it, not the temporary high of excitement, but the permanent foundation of knowing. Type, I rest in knowing if you're seeing that you don't need to be constantly excited or emotionally charged. You just need that quiet, unshakable conviction that it's already done in consciousness. Now, I want to show you something that sounds impossible, but becomes one of your most powerful tools once you understand how consciousness works. Most people believe the past is fixed, unchangeable, set in stone. They think what happened already happened, and there's nothing you can do about it except accept it and move on. But that's not actually true. The past isn't a fixed point in time. It's a pattern held in your consciousness, a memory you're actively maintaining. And because it exists in consciousness, it can be revised. When something undesirable happens to you, most people's natural response is to replay it over and over in their mind. They rehearse what was said, what was done, how they were hurt or disappointed. They tell the story to friends. They relive the emotions. They cement that version of events deeper and deeper into their consciousness. And by constantly rehearsing it, they keep it alive, they keep feeding it energy. They keep making it more real, more solid, more influential in shaping their present and future. But here's the hidden truth that changes everything. You don't have to accept the past as it happened. You can revise it. When something occurs that you don't like, instead of rehearsing it the way it happened, you replay the scene in your imagination as it should have been. You see the conversation going differently. You feel the interaction producing a better outcome. You imagine the situation resolving in the way you wished it had. And you feel that revision, you experience that alternative version until it becomes more real to you than the original. This isn't about denying what happened, it's about refusing to give power to what happened. because the version of the past you hold in consciousness is the version that influences your present. If you keep rehearsing the argument, the betrayal, the disappointment, you're carrying that pattern forward, and it will recreate itself. But if you revise it, if you replace that memory with a different pattern, you change its influence. You free yourself from repeating the same dynamics. I've seen people use this to heal relationships that seemed destroyed. They stopped replaying the fights and instead revised those memories to show love, understanding, and resolution. And as they persisted in the revision, the actual relationship began to shift. The other person started behaving differently. New conversations happened that mirrored the revised version. The past, even though it had already happened, was changed in its impact on the present. This is the journey from being imprisoned by your history to being the author of your story. You're not stuck with the past you experienced. You can rewrite it in consciousness, and in doing so, you rewrite its influence on your future. Behind the scenes of every major healing, every relationship restoration, every personal transformation, there's usually some element of revision happening. Someone stopped rehearsing what went wrong and started imagining what could have gone right. Now let me show you why most people exhaust themselves trying to manifest when it could be completely effortless. There's a principle here that once you really grasp it, will save you years. Effort is a confession of lack. Rest is a confession of fulfillment. Every time you're working hard to make something happen, every time you're straining and forcing and pushing, you're essentially telling consciousness, this isn't done yet. I don't have it. I need to make it happen through my effort. But when you rest in the knowing that it's already done, when you cease from all that anxious activity and simply be still, something miraculous occurs. Creation begins to move on your behalf. The universe orchestrates circumstances, arranges synchronicities, moves people and events in ways you could never have planned or predicted. Not because you're forcing it, but because you're allowing it. You've gotten out of the way. Think about how backwards most people's approach is. They assume their desire, and then immediately they start frantically doing things to make it happen. They assume they have the relationship, then desperately start swiping on dating apps and going to every social event. They assume they have the money, then anxiously check job boards and hustle harder. They assume they have the health, then obsessively research treatments and worry about symptoms. All of that activity is actually working against the manifestation because it's rooted in the feeling of not having it yet. But when you truly rest, when you assume it's done and then simply go about your life with peace and confidence, you enter a state of allowing. You're not blocking the manifestation with your anxiety. You're not interfering with your doubt. You're not contradicting your assumption with your actions. You've made the claim in consciousness, and now you're resting in the certainty that the visible world will catch up to reflect that claim. This doesn't mean you become passive or lazy. It means your actions come from inspiration rather than desperation, from overflow rather than lack, from certainty rather than fear. When you're resting in your assumption, you might still take action, but those actions feel easy, natural, effortless. They're not forced. They're not driven by anxiety about whether it's going to work. They're simply the natural expression of someone who already is what you've assumed yourself to be. The transformation from effortful manifestation to effortless creation is one of the most profound shifts you can make. And it happens when you finally understand that your job isn't to make it happen. Your job is to assume it's already happened in consciousness and rest in that assumption. The how, the when, the specific pathway, none of that is your concern. That's handled by intelligence far beyond your conscious planning. Leave "I rest and allow" in the comments if you're ready to stop exhausting yourself trying to force manifestations, and instead enter that state of peaceful certainty where everything flows to you naturally. Now let me give you the most powerful practical technique you can use, and it takes advantage of a very specific window of time when your consciousness is incredibly receptive. There's a moment every single night, right in that drowsy interval between being fully awake and falling asleep, when something extraordinary happens. Your conscious mind, with all its doubts and objections and logical limitations, begins to relax. It loses its grip. And your subconscious mind, which is where all creation actually happens, becomes wide open and impressionable. This is the moment to do your work. Not during the middle of the day when you're distracted and your rational mind is fighting every assumption you make. Not when you're stressed and caught up in circumstances, but in that quiet, drowsy state right before sleep. This is when you construct a brief scene in your imagination that implies your wish is already fulfilled. And here's what's critical. You don't imagine the process of getting what you want. You don't visualize all the steps. You imagine the result, the end, the fulfilled wish. If you desire wealth, you don't imagine working hard and making money. You imagine an action that implies you're already wealthy. Maybe you're writing a generous check to a charity. Maybe you're casually purchasing something expensive without checking the price. Whatever scene you choose, it should clearly imply that your desire is already a fact. Make that scene sensory-rich. See it vividly. Hear the sounds associated with it. Feel the textures. Smell the scents. Make it so real that for those moments you forget you're imagining and you actually experience it. Then loop that scene. Play it again. And again. Feel it deeply each time. Let the feeling of already having your desire saturate your entire being. And then, while still in that feeling, while still experiencing that scene, allow yourself to drift into sleep. Don't fight sleep. Don't try to stay awake. Let yourself fall asleep in the feeling of the wish fulfilled. The sleep seals the impression. It's like pressing the scene deep into fertile ground where it can take root and grow without interference from your conscious mind. This nightly practice is where transformation happens. Behind the scenes of your waking life, while you sleep, that impression you made is working its way into your subconscious. It's restructuring your assumptions. It's planting seeds that must sprout. And if you do this consistently night after night, you'll start to notice that your waking reality begins to mirror those nighttime impressions. Opportunities appear. Synchronicities happen. People show up. Circumstances shift. Not through force, but through the natural unfolding of what you've planted in consciousness. But there's another practice that's equally powerful, and it happens throughout your entire day. Most people have no idea how much damage they're doing to their own manifestations through their inner conversation. I'm not talking about what you say out loud. I'm talking about that constant stream of silent self-talk that's running through your mind every waking moment. That inner narrator that's commenting on everything, judging everything, assuming things about everything. For most people, that inner voice is unconsciously narrating lack and limitation all day long. They see something they want and immediately think, "I can't afford that." They encounter an opportunity and think, "That's not for people like me." They imagine their desire and think, "That would be nice, but it's unrealistic." Every single one of those thoughts is an assumption. Every one is a command to consciousness. Every one is creating your reality. And if your inner voice is constantly speaking lack, you're constantly creating lack. The hidden truth is that your inner conversation shapes your world more than anything you say out loud, more than any affirmation you speak, more than any vision board you create. Because your inner voice is active all the time. It's the running commentary of your consciousness, and it's either working for you or against you every single moment. So the practice is to become aware of that inner voice. Catch it in the act. Notice when it's speaking limitation, lack, impossibility, and immediately revise it. The moment you catch yourself thinking, "I can't afford this," stop and replace it with, "I am abundantly supplied." When you hear yourself thinking, "I'm not good enough," interrupt that thought and declare, "I am more than enough." When doubt creeps in saying, "This won't work," redirect it to, "It is already done." This isn't about forced positive thinking. This is about taking conscious control of the creative power of your own mind. Because your inner voice isn't just commentary, it's the voice of creative authority. It's the voice that's speaking your world into existence moment by moment. When you police that voice, when you make it speak only what you want to experience, you're directing the creative power toward your desires instead of away from them. The impact of this practice compounds over time. At first, you'll catch yourself after the fact. You'll notice you've been thinking negatively for hours, but gradually you'll catch it sooner, then immediately. Then eventually your inner voice naturally speaks from your desired state without you having to consciously correct it. That's when you know the assumption has become natural. That's when manifestation becomes effortless. Comment, "My inner voice creates." If you're committing to becoming conscious of your inner dialogue and deliberately directing it toward what you want to experience instead of unconsciously reinforcing what you don't want. Now let me reveal another dimension of this teaching that most people completely miss when they practice gratitude. You've probably been told to be grateful, to count your blessings, to appreciate what you have. And that's all fine, but true gratitude in the context of manifestation is something far more powerful. It's not just about being thankful for what you already see. It's about giving thanks for what you desire, as though you've already received it. This is gratitude as assumption, and it's one of the fastest ways to shift your consciousness from wanting to having. When you give thanks for something that isn't yet visible in your physical reality, you're making a profound statement to consciousness. You're claiming it as yours. You're declaring that it's already done. You're not hoping it might come someday. You're acknowledging it as present fact. The words you use matter here. You don't say, "Thank you for this desire which will be mine." You say, "Thank you for this desire which is now mine." Present tense, already possessed, already received. This single shift in language reveals a complete transformation in your state of consciousness. When you're grateful for something you will have in the future, you're still in a state of separation from it. You're acknowledging it's not here yet. But when you're grateful for something you already have, even though your eyes don't see it yet, you're occupying the state of possession. You're living in the end. You're resting in fulfillment. And that state is what creates. The hidden truth behind this practice is that gratitude and lack cannot coexist. When you're genuinely grateful for your desire as already fulfilled, you cannot simultaneously feel the absence of it. The feeling of "thank you, it's mine," and the feeling of "I don't have it" are mutually exclusive. So by practicing gratitude for the fulfilled wish, you're automatically evicting lack from your consciousness. You're replacing the old assumption with the new one through a feeling that's deeply positive and natural. Think about how you feel when you're genuinely grateful. There's a warmth, an ease, a satisfaction. That's the feeling of already having. When you say, "Thank you for my abundant bank account," before you see the money and you really feel that gratitude, you're experiencing the consciousness of abundance. You're not waiting to feel abundant until the money shows up. You're feeling abundant now, and the money must follow because the outer always reflects the inner. But here's where we need to address the biggest obstacle you're going to face on this journey, and it's the reason why most people give up right before their manifestation appears. The greatest challenge in all of this isn't making the assumption once. It's not understanding the principle. It's not even practicing the technique. The greatest challenge is persisting in your assumption when the outer world is screaming at you that you're wrong, because doubt will come. It's inevitable. You'll assume you're wealthy and then check your bank account and see the same low balance. You'll assume you're in a loving relationship and then wake up alone. You'll assume you're healthy and then feel a symptom, and in those moments, appearances will mock you. They'll say, "See, this doesn't work. You're fooling yourself. Nothing's changed. This is the test. This is where most people fail." But understand something crucial. The doubt you feel, the contradiction you see, none of that means the law isn't working. It means you're in the burial period. Remember the resurrection pattern? You've crucified the old self, you're in the tomb waiting, and the new hasn't emerged yet. This is exactly when you need to persist the most. This is when you need to return to your assumption with even more determination. Every single time doubt creeps in, you catch it and redirect back to your assumption. Every time circumstances try to convince you it's not working, you refuse to accept that evidence and you reaffirm what you're claiming in consciousness. Every time someone questions you or your situation looks hopeless, you go back to living in the end, feeling the wish fulfilled, resting in the certainty that it's already done. The law never fails. It's operating perfectly all the time. What fails is people's persistence. They assume for a day, a week, maybe a month, and then when they don't see results, they give up. They go back to their old assumptions. They resurrect the old self. They abort the manifestation right before it was about to break through. Behind the scenes of every miracle you've ever heard about, there was someone who persisted through doubt. Someone who refused to let appearances dictate their assumptions. Someone who stood firm in the invisible reality until the visible had no choice but to conform. This is the journey from casual wisher to conscious creator. It's not about getting lucky. It's not about having some special gift. It's about making a decision in consciousness and then being stubborn enough, faithful enough, persistent enough to maintain that decision regardless of what happens externally. The transformation happens not when you learn the technique, but when you prove to yourself that you can persist through the test. Write, "I persist beyond doubt," if you're committing to maintaining your assumption even when everything around you is telling you to give up. Because this persistence is what separates those who manifest consistently from those who keep starting over. Now let me show you the raw power of this principle through two real stories that prove consciousness always overrides physical circumstances, no matter how impossible the situation appears. The first involves a woman who had been trying to conceive a child for years. She'd been through every medical test, tried every treatment, consulted multiple specialists, and the verdict from every doctor was the same. Her body simply couldn't sustain a pregnancy. It was medically impossible. They told her to accept it and move on, maybe consider adoption. Most people would have taken that diagnosis as final. The doctors had spoken. Science had declared the verdict. The physical evidence was clear. But this woman understood something the doctors didn't. She understood that her body wasn't the cause of her experience. Her consciousness was. And if she could change her consciousness, her body would have no choice but to follow. So instead of accepting the impossibility, she decided to assume the opposite. Every single night, she didn't imagine trying to get pregnant. She didn't visualize doctor appointments or treatments. She went straight to the end. She felt a baby in her arms. She experienced the weight of that child against her chest. She heard the soft breathing, the little coos. She nursed the baby in her imagination. She loved it. She made it so vivid, so sensory rich, so real that in those moments before sleep, she completely forgot she was imagining. She was experiencing. And she did this night after night after night, persisting in that assumption despite what every test result said, despite what every doctor told her, despite what her body's history suggested. Within 3 months, she was pregnant. The doctors were absolutely astounded. They called it spontaneous remission, a medical mystery, an unexplainable reversal. They couldn't make sense of it because they were looking at it from the wrong direction. They thought the body was the cause and the pregnancy was the effect. But the truth is, the assumption was the cause and the pregnancy was the effect. Her body didn't heal itself. It conformed to her new assumption. It reflected the reality she had been maintaining in consciousness. This wasn't a miracle. This was law operating exactly as it always operates. The second story involves a man who was absolutely drowning in debt. We're not talking about a little bit of money owed. This was crushing, overwhelming debt that seemed impossible to escape. He was getting calls from creditors daily. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus. Every thought was dominated by how much he owed and how impossible it would be to ever get free. The weight of it was destroying his life. And then he learned this teaching. He was told something that seemed insane at first. Stop identifying with the debt. Stop thinking about it. Stop feeling it. Stop making it your reality in consciousness. Instead, assume you're already debt-free. Now, his mind immediately protested. How could he assume freedom when he was so clearly trapped? How could he pretend the debt didn't exist when it was the most real thing in his life? But he was desperate enough to try. So here's what he did. Every single time his mind went to the debt, and at first it went there constantly, he caught himself and redirected. He didn't allow himself to finish the thought about what he owed or who he owed it to or how he'd pay it. The moment he noticed his mind going there, he stopped and said internally, I am debt-free. Not, I will be debt-free. Not, I'm working toward being debt-free. Present tense. Already accomplished, already true in consciousness. At first, this felt ridiculous. It felt like lying to himself. But he persisted, day after day, week after week, redirecting his thoughts hundreds of times a day, and slowly, something started to shift. The feeling of burden began to lift. The anxiety eased. He started to actually feel free in consciousness, even though the physical circumstances hadn't changed yet. He was living in the end, occupying the state of someone who had no debt, even while the letters and calls continued. And then reality began to conform. Within a year, through the most unexpected channels imaginable, he was completely debt-free. An old debt was forgiven due to a technicality he didn't even know existed. A windfall came from a source he never anticipated. Opportunities appeared that allowed him to clear accounts he thought would haunt him forever. None of this happened because he worked harder or earned more or figured out some clever financial strategy. It happened because he assumed freedom first, persisted in that assumption, and allowed consciousness to orchestrate the physical reality to match. The transformation in both of these stories wasn't in the external circumstances suddenly deciding to cooperate. The transformation was in consciousness first, and the circumstances had no choice but to follow. Behind the scenes of what looked like medical impossibilities and financial miracles was simply law operating, assumption creating reality, consciousness manifesting as circumstance. Leave consciousness is cause. If you're understanding that no matter how impossible your situation seems, no matter what experts tell you, no matter what evidence you're seeing, you can assume the opposite and watch reality rearrange itself to match. Now, I want to address one of the biggest mistakes that sabotages most people's manifestations, and it's something that seems logical but is actually completely backwards. When you decide what you want, when you make your assumption, Your mind immediately wants to figure out how it's going to happen. You start strategizing, you start planning, you start trying to map out the pathway from where you are to where you want to be. And in doing so, you're actually limiting your manifestation to the narrow possibilities your conscious mind can conceive. Here's the revelation: the how is not your concern. Your job is to assume the end. The universe's job is to orchestrate the means, and the intelligence that orchestrates manifestation is infinitely more creative, more resourceful, more capable than your conscious planning could ever be. When you try to control the pathway, when you insist it has to happen in the specific way you've imagined, you're actually blocking countless other pathways that would be faster, easier, more perfect. Think about the woman who conceived the impossible baby. If she had tried to figure out how it would happen, she would have been stuck in the limitations of what medicine said was possible. If the debt-free man had tried to strategize his way out, he would have been confined to earning and saving within his known circumstances. But because they didn't worry about the how, because they just assumed the end and let go of controlling the process, consciousness arranged things in ways they never could have planned. This is the transformation from being a control freak to being a conscious creator. Behind the scenes of every manifestation that seems miraculous or impossible, there's someone who let go of needing to know how. They trusted the process. They trusted that if they held the assumption, if they occupied the state, the pathway would appear. And it always does, but usually not in the way you expected. Usually in ways that are better, more elegant, more surprising than anything you could have orchestrated yourself. The hidden truth is that your conscious mind operates from limitation. It only knows what it's experienced before. It only sees the doors it's already aware of. But consciousness itself, the creative power behind all manifestation, has access to infinite possibilities. It can move people you've never met. It can create opportunities that don't currently exist. It can arrange synchronicities that seem like pure magic, but only if you get out of the way and stop trying to control how it happens. Now let me take you even deeper into understanding why manifestation can happen so quickly, why some people experience results in 24 hours while others wait years. It all comes down to understanding what time actually is. Most people think of time as this linear river that flows in one direction. You're here in the present, your past is behind you, your future is ahead of you, and you're slowly floating from one to the other. But that's not how time actually works at the level of consciousness. Time isn't a river, it's a dimension. Just like you can move through space, forward, backward, left, right, you move through time by shifting your consciousness. And here's what changes everything. The past, present, and future don't exist in sequence. They exist simultaneously. Right now, in this moment, infinite versions of your future already exist as possibilities. Every choice, every assumption, every state of consciousness corresponds to a different timeline, a different version of reality. When you assume a new state, when you claim your desire is already fulfilled, you're not sitting in the present waiting for the future to slowly arrive. You're selecting a timeline where your desire is already real, and you're making that timeline your present experience. You're not creating something new, you're selecting something that already exists in the field of infinite possibilities and pulling it into your current experience through your assumption. This is why manifestation can be instant. You're not waiting for time to pass. You're not waiting for circumstances to slowly shift. You're making a quantum jump from one timeline to another, from the timeline where you don't have your desire to the timeline where you do. And that jump happens in consciousness the moment you assume. The physical manifestation is just the evidence catching up to show you the timeline you've selected. Think about how radically this changes your relationship with time. You're not a victim of time, slowly aging, slowly progressing, slowly working toward your goals. You're navigating through time by choosing states of consciousness. Every assumption is a timeline selection. Every time you occupy the state of the wish fulfilled, you're tuning into a reality where that wish is already fact. The journey from desire to manifestation isn't about time passing. It's about you, consistently staying tuned to the frequency of the timeline where it's already done. Comment, "I select my timeline now," if you're grasping that you're not waiting for your future to unfold. You're choosing which version of reality you want to experience by the state you choose to occupy in consciousness. Now let me reveal something about your words that you've probably never considered. And once you understand this, you'll never speak carelessly again. Your words are not just sounds vibrating through the air. They're not just communication tools. They are decrees. They are commands that create reality. Every single word you speak, especially the words that follow "I am," is a direct instruction to consciousness about what you are claiming as your identity and your experience. When you say "I am tired," you're not describing how you feel. You're commanding your body to embody tiredness. You're decreeing that state into your experience. When you say "I am broke," you're not observing your financial situation. You're commanding lack to manifest in your reality. When you say "I am lonely," you're not reporting on your relationship status. You're creating loneliness through the authority of your word. This is the hidden truth that most people never grasp. Your words are not passive descriptions, they're active creations. Think about how carelessly most people use these two most powerful words in existence. I am. They say, "I am sick," when they feel a symptom. "I am stressed," when facing a challenge. "I am struggling," when things get difficult. "I am unlucky," when something doesn't go their way. And every single time they speak those words, they're cementing that state deeper into their consciousness. They're commanding their reality to produce more evidence of sickness, stress, struggle, and bad luck. Your words are that powerful. But the transformation happens when you become conscious of this creative authority and start using it deliberately. When you start saying, "I am healthy," even when you feel symptoms. "I am abundant," even when you see lack. "I am blessed," even when circumstances look challenging. "I am successful," even when results haven't appeared yet. These aren't lies. These aren't affirmations you're hoping will come true. These are commands. These are decrees. These are you exercising your divine authority to define your reality. Behind the scenes of your entire life, your words have been creating your experience. Every limitation you're facing right now, you've probably been declaring it with your own mouth for years. Every struggle, you've been commanding it into existence through careless speech. But the moment you take control of your words, the moment you become intentional about what you speak after "I am," everything begins to shift, because consciousness responds to your word as law. Now, I want to take you into one of the deepest spiritual concepts that's been completely misunderstood for thousands of years. When ancient texts talk about sacrifice, most people think about killing animals on altars, about blood and rituals and appeasing an angry deity. But that's not what sacrifice means at all. To sacrifice means to make sacred, to take something and elevate it, to consecrate it, to declare it holy and worthy of your devotion and attention. When you sacrifice in the true sense, you're not giving something up as punishment. You're making sacred what you choose to dwell upon in consciousness. You're taking your desire and making it the most sacred thing in your awareness. You're dedicating your consciousness to it. You're consecrating your attention to the state of the wish fulfilled. That's the real sacrifice, and it's what pleases the creative power within you. Not because that power demands offerings, but because that's how the mechanism of creation works. The sacrifice you're actually being asked to make is the sacrifice of your old beliefs. You must be willing to kill the old assumption of limitation and make sacred the new assumption of fulfillment. You must be willing to sacrifice your belief in impossibility and consecrate your consciousness to possibility. You must put your old self-concept on the altar and let it die so the new self-concept can live. This is the sacrifice that transforms your reality. Most people cling to their old beliefs like treasured possessions. They hold on to their stories of limitation, their identities as victims, their excuses for why they can't have what they want. They're unwilling to sacrifice those old patterns, even though those patterns are keeping them imprisoned. But the journey to manifestation requires you to lay those old beliefs on the altar and watch them burn. You must be willing to sacrifice who you've been for who you're becoming. This is the transformation that separates those who manifest from those who remain stuck. Behind the scenes of every major breakthrough, there's always a moment where someone made a sacrifice. Not of blood or money or external things, but of consciousness. They sacrificed their old way of thinking. They made sacred their new assumption. They consecrated their attention to the wish fulfilled and refused to return to the old state, no matter how comfortable or familiar it was. The impact of this understanding is profound. When you realize that sacrifice isn't about giving things up in the external world, but about making your desired state sacred in consciousness, everything changes. You stop waiting for permission to claim your desire. You stop feeling guilty about wanting more. You stop thinking you need to earn it or deserve it. You simply make it sacred by dwelling on it, assuming it, feeling it, living it in consciousness. Type, "I make it sacred" if you're ready to sacrifice your old beliefs about limitation and make your desired reality the most sacred thing you hold in consciousness. Now let me tell you a story that's actually your story, even though you might not have realized it until this moment. There's an ancient parable about a son who demanded his inheritance from his father, left home, and went to a distant country where he squandered everything. He ended up in absolute poverty, feeding pigs, starving, having lost everything of value. Then one day he came to himself. He remembered who he was. He remembered his father's house. And he decided to return home, not knowing if he'd be accepted, not knowing if he was worthy, but returning anyway. This is your journey. You are that son. You left your father's house, which is the consciousness of I am, the awareness of your true divine nature, your unlimited creative power. You wandered into a far country of limitation, lack, and fear. You forgot who you really were. You identified with the body, with circumstances, with the illusions of the physical world. You squandered your inheritance, which is your divine birthright to create any reality you desire. You fed the pigs of negative thoughts and limiting beliefs. You starved in poverty consciousness, not because you were actually poor, but because you forgot you were the creator of your experience. But now, in this very moment, you're coming to yourself. You're remembering. You're waking up from the dream of limitation. You're realizing that you're not a powerless victim of circumstances. You're not defined by your past or your current conditions. You are consciousness itself, temporarily focused in a physical form, and you have the power to create any experience you choose through the authority of your assumptions. This remembering, this awakening, is your return to your father's house. And here's the beautiful part of the story that most people miss. When the father saw his son returning from a distance, he didn't wait. He ran to him. He embraced him. He didn't condemn him or lecture him or make him prove he'd changed. He immediately restored him, clothed him in the finest robe, put a ring of authority on his finger and threw a celebration, because the son who was lost has been found. The son who was dead is alive again. This is what's happening to you right now. Your divine consciousness, your true nature, is not judging you for having wandered into limitation. It's not making you earn your way back. It's welcoming you home with open arms the moment you turn toward it. The moment you remember who you are, everything is restored. Not because you deserve it, but because it's your nature. It's your birthright. It's who you've always been underneath the temporary costume of limitation. The transformation from limitation to freedom isn't about becoming something new. It's about remembering something ancient. It's about returning to your true nature after a journey through forgetfulness. And that return is available to you right now, in this moment, simply by assuming your divine identity, by claiming your creative authority, by occupying the consciousness of I am without adding any limitations after it. But here's where most people get tripped up on this journey home. They want to see the signs before they'll believe. They want evidence that they're truly divine before they'll assume it. They want proof that manifestation works before they'll commit to it. They want to see the Father running toward them before they'll take the first step home. And that's completely backwards. That's like demanding to see the harvest before you're willing to plant the seed. The hidden truth that changes everything is this: signs follow your assumption. They don't precede it. You must believe first. You must assume first. You must claim it in consciousness first. And then the signs have no choice but to follow. When you assume wealth, the signs of wealth begin to appear. When you assume health, the symptoms of health manifest. When you assume love, the evidence of love shows up. But your assumption causes the signs. The signs don't cause your assumption. Most people have been conditioned to think the opposite. They've been taught to observe reality and let those observations determine their beliefs. They look at their bank account and let that determine whether they assume abundance or lack. They look at their body and let that determine whether they assume health or sickness. They look at their circumstances and let those dictate their assumptions about what's possible. But that's living backwards. That's letting the effect dictate the cause. Behind the scenes of every manifestation you've ever experienced, this principle was operating. Think about a time when something worked out for you. If you examine it closely, you'll realize there was a moment when you just knew it would work out, when you assumed it was done before you saw any evidence. That assumption came first, and then the signs followed. But because you weren't conscious of the process, you probably thought you got lucky, or that circumstances just happened to align. Now you know the truth. Your assumption created the alignment. Leave, signs follow me now. If you're understanding that you don't wait for reality to prove your assumptions right. You make your assumptions and watch reality scramble to provide the evidence. Now, I want to show you why so many people fail at manifestation, even when they understand all these principles. There's a teaching about a narrow gate, and most people completely miss its meaning. The narrow gate isn't about exclusivity or difficulty, it's about focus, it's about specificity, it's about unwavering commitment to one singular assumption. And most people never find this gate because they're wandering on the broad road of vague wishing and general hoping. Think about how most people approach what they want. They want to be successful, but they don't define what that means. They want to be happy, but they keep shifting what happiness looks like. They want abundance, but they scatter their attention across money, relationships, health, career, never fully committing to any single assumption. They're trying to manifest everything at once, which means they're manifesting nothing powerfully. They're on the broad road where everyone wanders aimlessly, hoping things will generally get better somehow, but never arriving at any specific destination. The narrow gate requires something different. It requires you to choose one desire, one specific outcome, one clear manifestation, not 5 things, not 10 goals. One. And then you make one assumption about that desire. You claim it as already fulfilled. You occupy that one state, and you persist in that single, focused claim until you pass through the gate to the other side, where your desire awaits you in full physical manifestation. This doesn't mean you can't have multiple desires eventually. It means you focus your creative power like a laser beam on one thing at a time, instead of diffusing it like scattered light across everything. when you narrow your focus, when you channel all your consciousness into one assumption, when you stop dabbling and start committing, that's when the real power emerges. That's when manifestation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. The transformation here is from being a scattered dreamer to being a focused creator. Behind the scenes of every major manifestation, you'll find someone who narrowed their focus, someone who chose one desire and went all in on that assumption, someone who walked through the narrow gate instead of wandering on the broad road. The impact of this single shift in approach cannot be overstated. Most people fail not because the law doesn't work, but because they never actually apply it with the focus and specificity it requires. Now, let me bring you to the ultimate truth that encompasses everything we've covered. You are not a small, limited human being who's learning techniques to manipulate reality. You are not a powerless person trying to convince the universe to give you what you want. You are not separate from the creative power that forms worlds and moves galaxies. You are that power. Your true name, your deepest identity, is I Am, the same name revealed as the name of the divine source of all creation. This isn't metaphor. This isn't poetry. This is the literal truth of what you are. You are infinite consciousness that has temporarily focused itself into a physical body and a specific life experience. But the body isn't you. The circumstances aren't you. The past isn't you. You are the awareness experiencing all of these things. You are the I Am behind every experience, every thought, every sensation. And that I Am is unlimited, undefined, infinite in its creative potential. When you truly recognize this, when you stop identifying as the limited person with problems and start identifying as the infinite consciousness creating experiences, everything changes. You realize you were never separate from creative power. There's no gap between you and manifestation. You don't have to reach for it or attract it or convince it to come to you. You are it. You are the power. You are the source. You are the creator wearing a temporary costume called your current life. This recognition is the ultimate transformation. From believing you're a small self trying to use manifestation to knowing you are consciousness itself playing with form. From thinking you need to earn or deserve your desires to understanding that as infinite awareness, you can experience anything you choose simply by assuming it. From feeling powerless in the face of circumstances to recognizing that circumstances have no power except what you give them through your assumptions. Behind the scenes of this entire teaching, behind every technique and principle and practice, is this one simple truth. You are I Am. Everything else is just costuming. Everything else is just states you're trying on temporarily. But the core of what you are is unlimited, eternal, creative, in consciousness. And when you know this, when you really know it not just intellectually, but experientially, nothing is impossible. Every limitation dissolves. Every door opens. Every desire becomes available because you recognize yourself as the one who creates desire, experience, and manifestation all at once. Comment, I am is who I am, if you're beginning to see past the illusion of limitation and recognize your true nature as infinite creative consciousness. If you've made it this far, you're not here by accident. Most people would have clicked away in the first few minutes, but you stayed. You absorbed this entire teaching. You felt something shift inside you. That tells me you're ready for this transformation. You're ready to stop being a prisoner of circumstances and start being the conscious creator you were always meant to be. This channel exists for people like you, people who are done with surface-level advice and ready for the truth that actually changes reality. If this resonated with you, if you found value in what we explored together today, I'd love for you to subscribe. Not because I'm asking for a favor, but because there's so much more depth to cover, so many more layers to this teaching, and I want to make sure you don't miss what's coming next. And here's how I'll know you really made it to the end. Leave a comment that says, "I am the creator." When I see that, I'll know you not only watched, but absorbed the core message. It's also a declaration, a commitment you're making to yourself and to your new reality. If this video sparked something in you, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who are searching for the same truth you just discovered. And honestly, it lets me know this connected with you in a meaningful way. Now, there's a video right here that takes this even deeper into practical application. The exact steps to make your first assumption feel completely natural, so manifestation happens effortlessly. Click and continue with me over there. Because what you've learned today is just the beginning of what's possible when you truly understand who you are.